In a quiet, tree-lined suburb where children played on sidewalks and neighbors waved hello, John Anderson and his wife, Sarah, had found their sanctuary. After years of saving, planning, and dreaming, they finally moved into a cozy home with a small garden that bloomed with vibrant flowers every spring. For John, it was more than just a house. It was a place to retire peacefully after decades of service as a Navy SEAL. Now in his late 40s, he spent most of his days tending to the lawn, building birdhouses in his garage, or simply enjoying the calm rhythm of suburban life. Sarah, a cheerful schoolteacher who always wore a warm smile, loved chatting with neighbors and baking cookies for holiday gatherings. Together, they were the kind of couple everyone admired. But even in this idyllic neighborhood, trouble had a way of finding its way in. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, ruled the community like an invisible hand, enforcing strict rules about everything from the color of shutters to how high grass could grow before it became unsightly. At first, John didn't mind too much. He understood the need for some order. After all, rules kept things running smoothly. But over time, he began to notice something unsettling. The HOA wasn't just about maintaining standards. It seemed obsessed with control. Every week, there were new notices slipped under doors, reminding residents of penalties for non-compliance. Some neighbors joked about it, calling it HOA tyranny, but no one dared challenge them openly. John, however, wasn't like other homeowners. While he complied with most of the HOA's demands, he occasionally bent minor rules, not out of defiance, but because he believed some of them were ridiculous. For instance, when the HOA sent him a warning about his flower pots being too colorful, he laughed it off and left them exactly where they were. To him, these little acts of rebellion weren't about causing trouble. They were about standing up for common sense. Still, he never expected his laid-back attitude would attract unwanted attention. One sunny afternoon, while John was at the hardware store picking up supplies for a new project, Sarah noticed two men walking up their driveway. They carried clipboards and wore matching polo shirts emblazoned with the HOA logo. At first, she thought nothing of it. They were probably just doing their rounds. But when they started taking pictures of the yard without asking permission, she stepped outside to greet them. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked politely, shading her eyes from the sun. The taller of the two men glanced at her briefly before returning his focus to his clipboard. "We're here to inspect your property for violations," he said curtly, not bothering to introduce himself. "Your hedge is overgrown, and those flower pots are non-compliant." Sarah blinked, surprised by their tone. "I'm sorry, but we've lived here for months, and no one has mentioned this before." "It's our job to enforce the rules," the second man chimed in, his voice dripping with superiority. "You'll need to address these issues immediately." Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, Sarah tried to reason with them. "Look, my husband will take care of it soon. There's really no rush." Her words cut short as the taller man suddenly stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Ma'am, we don't have time for excuses. If you can't comply, we'll document it and send you a fine." Something inside Sarah snapped. She crossed her arms firmly. "I think you should leave now. We'll handle this ourselves." Instead of backing off, the man grew angrier. Before she realized what was happening, he shoved her aside roughly, knocking her off balance. Stunned, Sarah stumbled backward, her arm hitting the edge of the porch railing. Pain shot through her elbow, but worse than the physical ache was the shock of what had just occurred. Her heart raced as she watched the men snap photos of her yard, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. Trembling, Sarah pulled out her phone and called John. As she recounted the incident, tears welled up in her eyes. This wasn't just about flower pots or hedges anymore. It was about respect, dignity, and feeling safe in their own home. Little did the HOA enforcers know, they had picked the wrong family to mess with. By the time John arrived home later that evening, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across their quiet street. Sarah was still shaken, pacing back and forth in the living room as she replayed the day's events in her mind. When John walked through the door, his usual calm demeanor shifted instantly upon seeing her distress. Setting down his tools, he listened intently as Sarah recounted every detail. The condescending tone of the HOA enforcers, their refusal to leave when asked, and finally, the shove that left her bruised and humiliated. John's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the edge of the kitchen counter until his knuckles turned white. He wasn't a man who lost his temper easily. Years of military training had taught him discipline and restraint. But this was different. This wasn't about rules or regulations. It was about protecting his family. The thought of someone laying a hand on Sarah made his blood boil. Still, he forced himself to stay composed. Losing control wouldn't solve anything, and he knew better than most how to handle tense situations strategically. "Did you get their names?" John asked quietly, his voice steady but laced with steel. Sarah nodded, pulling out her phone to show him the photos she'd managed to snap discreetly during the encounter. "I got their badges too," she added, pointing to the blurry images. "One of them is named Greg, and the other, I think it said Mark." John studied the pictures carefully, memorizing their faces. "Good," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "We're going to deal with this, but we're not doing it recklessly." The next morning, whispers spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Neighbors who had witnessed parts of the altercation, or at least heard about it secondhand, were buzzing with outrage. Some stopped by to offer support, bringing casseroles or kind words for Sarah. Others kept their distance, fearful of drawing the HOA's ire. It seemed everyone had an opinion, though few dared to speak out publicly against the organization. Word eventually reached Mr. Grayson, the president of the HOA, a tall, thin man with slicked back hair and an air of self-importance. Known for his rigid adherence to the rules, Grayson prided himself on maintaining order in the community. To him, the Andersons were troublemakers, people who refused to fall in line and respect authority. When reports of the incident landed on his desk, he dismissed them with a wave of his hand. "These things happen," he muttered to his assistant. "If they can't follow the guidelines, what do they expect?" But Grayson underestimated the situation, and John Anderson. That same afternoon, John paid a visit to the HOA office unannounced. Dressed in jeans and a plain t-shirt, he looked unassuming enough, but there was something about his presence that commanded attention. As he entered the small building, the receptionist glanced up nervously, unsure whether to welcome him or call security. Before she could decide, John strode past her and into the conference room, where Grayson sat reviewing documents. "Mr. Grayson," John began, his tone polite but firm, "I'm here to discuss an issue involving your employees." Grayson looked up, startled. For a moment, he seemed unsure how to respond. Then, recovering his composure, he gestured for John to sit. "Ah, yes, Mr. Anderson. We've been meaning to address some concerns regarding your property." John didn't sit. Instead, he placed a manila folder on the table between them. Inside were copies of emails, letters, and photographs documenting the HOA's interactions with the Andersons over the past year. Each piece of evidence highlighted inconsistencies in their enforcement policies and highlighted instances where the HOA appeared to target specific residents unfairly. "I'm not here to argue about flower pots or hedges," John said calmly. "What happened yesterday crossed a line. Your men pushed my wife, a woman half their size, and left her injured. That's not just unacceptable, it's dangerous. And if it happens again, I won't hesitate to escalate this further." Grayson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Look, accidents happen. I'm sure it was all just a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," John interrupted, his voice low but sharp. "And trust me, you don't want to find out what happens when someone pushes my family around." For the first time in years, Grayson found himself at a loss for words. There was something unnerving about the way John carried himself, calm, deliberate, and utterly unshakable. It wasn't just his words that intimidated the HOA president. It was the weight behind them, the unspoken promise that John was capable of far more than anyone realized. As John left the office, Grayson stared after him, unease settling deep in his chest. Whatever this man was planning, it was clear he wasn't going to back down anytime soon. The next few days passed in a tense haze for the Anderson household. John spent hours poring over documents, gathering evidence, and strategizing his next move. He knew that confronting the HOA directly wasn't enough. They thrived on power dynamics and intimidation, and they wouldn't back down unless forced to. But John also understood the importance of picking his battles carefully. This wasn't just about revenge or teaching someone a lesson. It was about sending a clear message. No one could treat his family this way without consequences. Sarah, still nursing her bruised arm, tried to focus on her daily routine, but the incident lingered in her mind like a dark cloud. She hated feeling vulnerable, especially in a place she had come to love. "Do you think they'll listen?" she asked John one evening as they sat together at the kitchen table. Her voice was soft, tinged with both hope and doubt. "They don't have a choice," John replied, his tone steady. "But if they won't listen, then we'll make sure everyone else does." True to his word, John decided to attend the next HOA meeting, a monthly gathering where board members discussed community issues and residents occasionally voiced complaints. News of his attendance spread quickly, thanks to curious neighbors eager to see how things would unfold. By the time John arrived at the community center, whispers filled the room. Some attendees eyed him warily, while others nodded in quiet solidarity. Even Mr. Grayson seemed uneasy, fidgeting with his tie as he took his seat at the head of the table. When it was finally John's turn to speak, he stood up calmly, drawing every eye in the room. Without raising his voice or making accusations, he began laying out his case. He presented photos of his property, pointing out how minor infractions like flower pot placement were being exaggerated while bigger problems, like potholes in the streets or broken streetlights, went ignored. He highlighted inconsistencies in enforcement, showing examples of other homes that violated similar rules yet faced no penalties. Most importantly, he recounted the incident involving Sarah, emphasizing not only the physical harm, but also the emotional toll it had taken on their family. "This isn't about me or my wife breaking rules," John said, his voice firm but measured. "It's about fairness. It's about respect. And it's about ensuring that no one else has to feel unsafe in their own home because of unchecked authority." The room fell silent. Many residents exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly unsettled by what they were hearing. For years, they had tolerated the HOA's heavy-handed tactics, too afraid to push back. Now, watching John stand there so confidently, they couldn't help but wonder why they hadn't spoken up sooner. Mr. Grayson, however, refused to concede. Leaning forward in his chair, he cleared his throat loudly. "Mr. Anderson, I understand your concerns, but let's not blow this out of proportion," he said, attempting to sound authoritative. "Our enforcers are simply doing their jobs. If there was any misunderstanding, I assure you it will be addressed." John didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned slightly on the podium, his piercing gaze locking onto Grayson's. "You keep using that word, misunderstanding," he said slowly. "Let me clarify something for you. My wife was shoved to the ground right in front of our house. That's not a misunderstanding. That's assault. And if you continue to dismiss it, I'll make sure the whole world knows exactly who's responsible." The room erupted into murmurs. Some people gasped audibly, while others whispered to their neighbors. Grayson's face flushed red, his composure cracking under the weight of John's words. "Now hold on a second," he stammered. "There's no need to threaten anyone here. We're trying to maintain order for the good of the community." "Order?" John shot back, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks more like bullying. And trust me, Mr. Grayson, I've dealt with bullies before. They always fold when someone stands up to them." For the first time in years, the HOA president found himself speechless. John's calm demeanor masked a steely resolve that left no room for negotiation. It was clear he wasn't bluffing, and Grayson knew it. As the meeting adjourned, several residents approached John to thank him for speaking out. One elderly woman even hugged him, tears in her eyes. "We've needed someone like you for so long," she whispered. "Thank you for having the courage to fight back." Walking home that night, John felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was short-lived. The battle was far from over, and he knew the HOA wouldn't give up without a fight. Still, he allowed himself a small smile. For the first time in days, he felt like they were finally gaining the upper hand. Despite John's powerful warning at the HOA meeting, the board refused to back down. In fact, they seemed determined to prove a point, doubling down on their aggressive tactics. A few days later, another crew of enforcers arrived at the Andersons' home, this time armed with tools and a locksmith. Their plan was bold and borderline absurd. They intended to remove the non-compliant flower pots themselves, claiming it was within their rights as representatives of the HOA. Sarah, who had been watering the garden when she spotted them pulling into the driveway, immediately stepped outside to block their path. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice firm despite the unease bubbling inside her. One of the enforcers, a burly man with a clipboard tucked under his arm, sneered at her. "We're here to fix the violations. You've ignored our warnings long enough." "This is private property," Sarah shot back, planting herself firmly in front of the gate. "You can't just barge in here and do whatever you want." The enforcer smirked, clearly unimpressed by her defiance. "Actually, we can," he said smugly, gesturing toward the locksmith. "Now step aside, ma'am, unless you want things to get messy." Sarah didn't move. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground, refusing to let them bully her again. For a moment, the standoff felt like it might end peacefully, until the lead enforcer lost patience. With an exasperated growl, he shoved Sarah hard enough to knock her off balance. She stumbled backward, landing painfully on the gravel driveway, her hands scraping against the rough surface. Upstairs, John had been working on a woodworking project when he heard the commotion below. He set down his tools and moved to the window, peering out just in time to see Sarah fall. His blood ran cold, then boiled over in an instant. Without hesitation, he bolted down the stairs, each step echoing through the house like thunder. By the time he reached the front door, his presence filled the air with an unmistakable intensity. The enforcers froze when they saw him emerge from the house. Tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating authority, John cut an imposing figure. His eyes locked onto the man who had pushed Sarah, burning with quiet fury. The enforcer took a nervous step back, suddenly aware that he might have made a grave mistake. "Get off my property," John said, his voice low and controlled but laced with steel. "Now." The men exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to respond. One of them stammered, "We're just doing our job." "You think I care about your excuses?" John interrupted, taking a deliberate step forward. "You put your hands on my wife. On my property. Do you have any idea what happens next if you don't leave?" The enforcers hesitated, their bravado crumbling under the weight of John's unwavering gaze. Finally, the lead enforcer muttered something under his breath and signaled for the others to retreat. They grabbed their tools and hurried back to their truck, leaving behind a trail of embarrassment and panic. As the vehicle sped away, Sarah climbed to her feet, brushing dirt off her jeans. She looked up at John, her expression a mix of relief and admiration. "I'm okay," she assured him before he could ask. "But, wow, that was intense." John nodded, his jaw still clenched. He turned to survey the yard, ensuring no damage had been done. Then, without a word, he walked over to the flower pots, the same ones the HOA had labeled non-compliant, and rearranged them slightly, almost mockingly. It was a small act of defiance, but it carried a world of meaning. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through the neighborhood. Videos captured by curious neighbors showed John standing protectively over Sarah while the enforcers scrambled to escape. Social media lit up with reactions, many praising John for defending his family against blatant abuse of power. Local news outlets picked up the story, dubbing him the neighborhood guardian. Comment sections overflowed with messages of support, with some even calling for investigations into the HOA's practices. Meanwhile, the HOA scrambled to contain the fallout. Grayson called emergency meetings, frantically trying to distance himself from the incident. He fired the enforcers involved, though the damage was already done. Residents who had once feared the organization now openly criticized its tactics, demanding transparency and accountability. For the first time, the HOA found itself on the defensive, its carefully constructed image of authority crumbling under public scrutiny. John, however, remained focused. While he appreciated the community's support, he knew this wasn't just about winning a single battle. It was about dismantling the system that allowed such behavior to happen in the first place. And he was far from finished. The aftermath of the confrontation left the Andersons' neighborhood buzzing with a mix of shock, admiration, and anticipation. John's calm yet commanding response to the HOA enforcers had struck a chord not only with his neighbors, but also with people far beyond their quiet suburb. The video clips shared online painted him as a modern-day hero, a man who stood up against injustice without resorting to anger or violence. Yet, for all the attention he received, John knew that real change required more than just viral moments. It needed action. Determined to hold the HOA accountable, John reached out to a lawyer recommended by one of his neighbors, a seasoned civil rights attorney named Lisa Chen. Known for taking on cases involving abuse of power, Lisa listened intently as John explained what had happened. She nodded thoughtfully, her sharp eyes scanning through the documents and photos he brought with him. When she finally spoke, her tone was firm but encouraging. "This isn't just about your family anymore," she said. "It's about setting a precedent. If we play this right, we can make sure something like this never happens again." With Lisa's guidance, John filed a lawsuit against the HOA, alleging harassment, negligence, and assault. The legal process would take time, but it sent an immediate message. The Andersons weren't backing down. News of the lawsuit spread quickly, drawing even more media attention. Reporters camped outside their home, eager to interview them, while talk shows debated whether homeowners' associations had too much unchecked authority. Some criticized the HOA for its heavy-handed tactics, while others defended strict regulations as necessary for maintaining property values. But no matter where people stood, everyone agreed. The Anderson case had ignited a national conversation. As the trial date approached, witnesses began coming forward, emboldened by John and Sarah's courage. One elderly couple recounted how the HOA fined them repeatedly for minor infractions, threatening foreclosure when they couldn't pay. A young family described being bullied into repainting their house after choosing a color deemed too bright. Even former HOA employees admitted to feeling pressured to enforce rules aggressively, regardless of fairness or common sense. During the trial, Sarah took the stand, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. She recounted the day she was shoved to the ground, describing the fear and helplessness she felt. Her testimony resonated deeply with the courtroom audience, many of whom wiped away tears as she spoke. John sat beside her, his expression unreadable, though anyone watching could see the protective way he rested his hand lightly on hers. When it was John's turn to testify, he delivered his account with precision and clarity. He didn't raise his voice or dramatize events. Instead, he let the facts speak for themselves. He explained his military background, not as a boast, but as context for why he valued discipline and respect above all else. "I've spent my life defending others," he said simply. "So when someone threatens my family, I won't stand by and do nothing." The turning point came when Lisa presented evidence of the HOA's pattern of misconduct. Emails showed board members targeting specific residents, while internal memos revealed quotas for issuing fines. The jury listened intently, their faces reflecting growing disbelief at the extent of the organization's abuses. By the time closing arguments concluded, it was clear that public opinion, and perhaps justice itself, was firmly on the Anderson side. The verdict arrived weeks later, sending shockwaves through the community. The HOA was found liable for emotional distress, physical harm, and systemic negligence. They were ordered to pay substantial damages to the Andersons and implement sweeping reforms to prevent future incidents. For John and Sarah, the outcome wasn't just a victory, it was validation. Their fight had exposed cracks in a system designed to intimidate, proving that ordinary people could challenge even the most entrenched powers if they stood together. But for John, the real reward wasn't the money or the headlines. It was seeing his neighbors start to reclaim their voices, refusing to live in fear any longer. As he walked Sarah back inside their home after the trial, he felt a quiet pride. The battle may have been won, but the work of rebuilding trust and fostering unity in their community was just beginning. The victory against the HOA brought more than just legal justice for John and Sarah. It sparked a transformation in their neighborhood. The ruling sent shockwaves through the community, forcing residents to confront uncomfortable truths about how they had allowed fear and intimidation to dictate their lives. For years, many had silently resented the HOA's iron grip, but lacked the courage to challenge it. Now, inspired by the Andersons' bravery, they began speaking up. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact at community meetings now gathered in groups, sharing stories of their own struggles with the HOA. Some admitted to paying hefty fines for trivial violations, like mismatched curtains or slightly crooked mailboxes. Others confessed they'd been too scared to report unfair treatment, fearing retaliation. Slowly but surely, the culture of silence started to crumble. A group of residents formed a committee dedicated to reforming the HOA's policies, ensuring transparency and fairness moving forward. John played an active role in these efforts, though he remained humble about his contributions. "This isn't about me," he often said during discussions. "It's about making sure everyone feels safe and respected here." His calm leadership earned him widespread respect, and soon neighbors looked to him as a voice of reason. Even those who had initially doubted him now saw him not as a troublemaker, but as a catalyst for positive change. The HOA, meanwhile, was in disarray. Stripped of its authority and facing mounting scrutiny from local authorities, the organization struggled to rebuild trust. Mr. Grayson resigned shortly after the trial, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew it was because he couldn't face the backlash. New board members were elected, residents who genuinely cared about the community rather than enforcing arbitrary rules. Under their leadership, outdated regulations were scrapped, penalties were reduced, and communication between the HOA and homeowners improved dramatically. Life for the Andersons returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible after such a whirlwind ordeal. Sarah threw herself into organizing neighborhood events, hosting barbecues and holiday parties that brought people together. These gatherings weren't just social, they symbolized a new era of cooperation and camaraderie. For the first time in years, laughter replaced tension on their street. John continued living quietly, finding solace in his woodworking projects and morning walks around the block. Yet, despite his low profile, strangers still approached him occasionally to thank him for standing up to the HOA. Some shared their own experiences of fighting injustice, while others simply wanted advice on handling difficult situations. John listened patiently, offering words of encouragement without ever seeking recognition. One day, while working in his garage, John received a letter from a young veteran struggling to adjust to civilian life. The man wrote about how John's story had inspired him to stand up for himself and pursue meaningful work helping others. Enclosed was a photo of the veteran volunteering at a local shelter, wearing a T-shirt that read, "Courage starts small." Moved by the gesture, John pinned the photo to his workshop wall, a reminder of the ripple effect one act of courage could create. Though the spotlight eventually faded, the impact of John and Sarah's fight lingered. Their case became a landmark example cited in discussions about homeowners' rights across the country. Lawmakers introduced legislation aimed at curbing abuses of power by HOAs, using the Anderson story as a rallying cry for reform. What had started as a personal battle over flower pots and hedges had evolved into something much bigger, a movement toward accountability and compassion. For John and Sarah, the journey reinforced what they had always believed. Home wasn't just a place, it was a feeling. And thanks to their perseverance, their neighborhood finally felt like the sanctuary they had dreamed of when they first moved in. As they sat together on their porch one evening, watching children play and neighbors chat, they exchanged a knowing smile. They hadn't set out to be heroes, but sometimes doing the right thing made all the difference. The Anderson story didn't end with the lawsuit or the reforms. It became a cornerstone of their lives, shaping how they interacted with their community and inspired those around them. Over time, the neighborhood transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The once tense atmosphere gave way to warmth and connection. Neighbors who had barely spoken before now shared coffee on weekends and organized block parties. Children raced bikes down sidewalks while parents chatted nearby, laughter filling the air. It was as if the entire community had taken a collective breath and finally relaxed. John found himself at the heart of this shift, though he never sought the role. People often turned to him for advice, not just about HOA matters, but about life in general. A young couple unsure about standing up to a difficult landlord, an elderly woman needing help navigating city permits for home repairs, even teenagers looking for guidance on leadership, all found their way to John's door. He listened patiently, offering practical solutions without judgment. His military background and quiet strength made him a natural mentor, someone people trusted instinctively. Sarah, too, embraced her new role within the community. She started a neighborhood book club that quickly grew into something more, a safe space where residents could discuss not only literature but also ideas for improving their surroundings. Under her influence, flower gardens sprouted across yards, painted murals brightened dull walls, and community service projects flourished. One particularly ambitious initiative involved turning an abandoned lot into a small park complete with benches, swings, and a vegetable garden. When the project was finished, Sarah joked that it felt like planting seeds of hope alongside tomatoes and peppers. Despite the changes, John and Sarah remained grounded. They continued tending to their own garden, hosting dinners for friends, and enjoying quiet evenings together. Yet there was a subtle difference now. They carried themselves with a renewed sense of purpose. Their actions had proven that standing up against injustice wasn't just about winning battles. It was about creating ripples of kindness and resilience. One crisp autumn morning, the neighborhood gathered for a special ceremony, unveiling a plaque dedicated to unity and cooperation. Etched into the metal were words chosen by the residents themselves. Asterisk, courage builds bridges. Together, we thrive. Asterisk, as John stood beside Sarah during the event, watching children laugh and neighbors hug, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what they had fought for, not fame or revenge, but a place where everyone belonged. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over their yard, John leaned back in his chair on the porch. Sarah joined him, handing over a cup of tea. For a moment, neither spoke, content to simply soak in the peacefulness of their surroundings. "You know," Sarah said softly, breaking the silence, "I used to think our dream house was just these four walls. But now I realize it's everything around us. These people, this community, it's all part of home." John nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Yeah," he agreed. "And sometimes protecting your home means protecting the people in it." As the stars began to twinkle above, the Andersons sat quietly, grateful for the journey that had brought them here. Their fight hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. In standing up for themselves, they had given others permission to do the same. And in doing so, they had built something far greater than any rulebook or regulation ever could, a true sense of belonging. Their story served as a reminder that courage isn't loud or flashy. It's steady, deliberate, and rooted in love. And sometimes, when ordinary people stand firm against unfairness, extraordinary things can happen.